This is a reading from the 5th chapter of Matthew. Again, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make a single hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. Many years ago, when I was an exchange student in Fiji, I joined what was called the Tramping Club, a group that went hiking and exploring on the islands of Fiji nearly every weekend and was composed almost entirely of expatriate citizens from Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Belonging to that club allowed me to go to parts of Fiji I would never otherwise have seen, but I really didn't know any of the club members. One weekend, one of the trips was an excursion to an old Methodist church that must have been of some historical significance in some way, but I don't remember what that was. We had to travel in a small motorboat to reach it, and without a tour guide or any documentation, we walked around and we looked at the walls. It was hard to know the significance of what we were looking at. So what I remember best is an exchange with someone else in the boat as we traveled away from the church. It was nearing noon, and for that reason, any pictures I made would not be especially picturesque or beautiful, but there was something about this massive Methodist church with 2 towers set among palm trees at the edge of the water that just said Colonial Fiji. And I began to make some pictures as we were motoring away. And a woman in the boat, there were only, I think, 3 of us, but I didn't know her name, said, "Isn't it a shame about those electrical wires? It would be such a pretty picture if they weren't there." I didn't know this woman, so I had no reason to be angry with her, yet I was instantly, if not quite angry, extremely irritated. And I said as mildly as I could muster, "But they are there." And she replied, "Yeah, but it would be a much better picture without them." I said nothing more, but knowing myself as I do, I am sure I spent the rest of that boat ride muttering to myself darkly about modern day heathens with no commitment to the truth. Nowadays, that woman would have taken her cell phone out, made the pictures, and said, "I'll just get rid of those power lines in Photoshop." I am trusting that you are all familiar in one way or another with Photoshop, the software program that allows you to remove objects from pictures or replace the sky or combine pictures together. It's especially used by people hoping to doctor family photos so that they can get one where everybody's eyes are open. And Photoshop isn't the only program that can do this, but Photoshop has become a generic word for that kind of manipulation. But this is the thing. For anyone, not just someone with training as a photojournalist, in ways that we never quite understand while we make them, the most ordinary photographs that we take now become evidence for the future of who and what we were. I think most of us are fascinated by pictures with old cars in them, and horrified by pictures of cars that look old to us now, but that look new and modern and sleek in, say, the 1970s or the 1980s, and just look so state of the art, and now look so dated. We look at photos and we can tell by what kinds of dresses women are wearing what era that photograph is from, and we look at a street and we look at the storefronts and the letters and the signs. And all of those things speak to us about a time that has gone past. And we take this evidence as a way of learning what life might have been like. Either for people long ago when we never were, or for the people that we used to be but couldn't quite see then the way we can see now. And so in particular, in that picture of the Methodist Church, the absence of power lines would have indicated that that part of Fiji was without electricity. Now, there were in fact many regions of Fiji that had no power or had only intermittent power. There were all sorts of unique and idiosyncratic ways of wiring villages for the 2 hours or so of power in the evening when they ran a generator, or they tapped the power generated by a small hydroelectric dam and stored in a battery to be used after dark. And seeing the way those lines ran between houses and small villages would really tell you something about that village. And seeing a cathedral with no power lines would seem to indicate that sometime in the 1990s in Fiji, this cathedral had no power, and that would not have been true. My co-workers at Friends United meeting all know, and use to my disadvantage, that all they have to do to get a rise out of me is talk about photoshopping something. Can't we just add Ben to the picture with Photoshop? Can't you just change the background with Photoshop? And they do it on purpose to see me sputter incoherently while my face turns red. But what really causes me to bang my head against the wall in despair is when others I work with, not my coworkers, not people who know how I respond to Photoshop, like members, say, of the FUM board, make casual jokes about Photoshop. You'll make me look younger in Photoshop, right? Oh, Seth must have left early. You can Photoshop him in, right? It bothers me because in all kinds of ways, friends insist that we are committed to truth with a capital T. We have a testimony of integrity. And yet when it comes to the casual use of images, we are just not so committed. And I want to set aside here specifically the question of using photo manipulation to deal with portraits, because there are reasons why we might feel that a straight photograph is less true than an ultra photograph when it comes to portraits. But there's all these other things that people want to use Photoshop for. I want to concentrate on the fact that I am water skiing out on the lake. So let me remove these pictures of people on the beach. Oh, the power lines in this picture look really, really messy. And I want to see that house better. I want to see that museum. I want to see the La Brea tar pits without the fencing. Let's just take that stuff away. Or this is my lovely begonia, but look at that piece of trash that blew in that I forgot to remove. Let's just take that out with Photoshop. As a photojournalist, I have signed an oath, not an oath, but a code of conduct to a truth that others can see and agree with. So I have signed a code of conduct that I will not use Photoshop in ways to alter the appearance of something. And not only that, I won't even teach myself how to use it because I don't want to know how to alter the appearance of something. And also, when board members say, you can make me look better, I can say, no, I can't, which is its own small revenge. But my commitment to that kind of truth isn't only because I'm a photojournalist, it's because I'm a Quaker. And what gets me so frustrated is when others who are Quaker don't see how you can't be a Quaker and talk about Photoshop in that way. This next issue of Quaker Life that's coming up is on integrity, which is one reason why I am having all these thoughts about Photoshop. And also because Patricia asked us last week what it means to be a Quaker in the 21st century. But there's a much longer passage from that book by Paul Anderson. It's an excerpt that we are going to be running in Quaker Life. And I want to read that extended excerpt because it really helped explain to me why I have such strong and negative feelings about Photoshop, and also went beyond that. So I'm going to read a chunk of what Paul Anderson wrote. Plain speech also calls for speaking the truth in love, which may involve confrontive words as well as consoling ones. While it is good to want to affirm and edify others, compliments must be genuine. They must emerge from the truth, not calculations of effect. Likewise, we might like to be well thought of, but true and authentic words are worth more than nicely crafted phrases. Therefore, we can welcome critical comments rather than dread them, especially if they are rooted in truth and delivered in love. Friends have thus insisted on the value of speaking and receiving the plain truth out of loving concern for the other. Truth is always a friend and always liberating. Unlike the false prophets of Israel who tickled the ears of the powerful, the true prophet utters the authentic word of the Lord, and those who receive it are thereby helped. Of course, discernment and articulation present a challenge. How does one genuinely know what the truth is about oneself or another? And how does one put a spirit-led conviction into frail human language? This challenge has led friends to commit to modesty of claim rather than overreaching one's insight. The true word that is right on target needs no embellishment. It can be spoken plainly and humbly. Friends have therefore been reluctant to claim more than is apparent and willing to describe the perspective from which an observation is made. A story about the Quaker in Yorkshire here applies. When asked if the sheep on the hillside were shorn, he responded, "I cannot say that they are entirely shorn, but it appears that on one side they have been." Another affront to plain speech is strong language, which plunders highest values in order to make an asserted point. The third of the 10 commandments forbids taking God's name in vain. Why? Because profanity usurps God's authority or the power of the sacred, only to step on it as a selfish means of bolstering a claim. Other forms of strong language across cultures desecrate the most intimate and sacred of human relationships and values. That is morally inexcusable. If a thesis cannot be compelling on the basis of its merits, stealing authority from other accounts of value is verbal thievery and not the way of Christ. Christ would have us always speak the truth and to do so faithfully and plainly. As the apostle says, "But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth." And speaking of truth and love, would we really want others to agree with us if we were wrong, or agree with us for the wrong reasons? Assenting to a leveraged message affirms coercion, not convincement. Therefore, the goal of discourse is not to entice consent or to win an argument, but to seek and discern the truth. Within that venture, all are potentially constructive partners, and in that sense, all are friends of truth working together as comrades in discernment. Integrity of speech and deed is the outward expression of living in the truth. Each bit of veiled truth casts a shadow upon the light of Christ, which illumines and liberates the world. There is great freedom in the truth. but the path is one of humility. Genuine humility and self-esteem are always functions of living in the truth. And the root of truth is always the self-giving love of God. When I read these words first by Paul Anderson, I understood many things about testimonies about the use of language. But the root of what he says is something I had not arrived at on my own. And it comes down to the second to the last paragraph here. Would we really want others to agree with us if we were wrong or agree with us for the wrong reasons? And I can say absolutely yes. I want others to agree with me. I don't care if I'm wrong or not. And I tend to use language to be persuasive. And it's a new idea to me. In a way, it shouldn't be, but it is a new idea to me that the use of all language should be to seek and discern the truth. It is difficult, I think, for most of us, particularly any of us who have been schooled to a certain level in how to use language to win an argument, to set aside the idea of winning an argument and replace it with the idea of seeking and discerning the truth. That is not an easy or a light commitment to make. And yet it is so easy to dismiss others as partners in seeking and discerning the truth. These days, when I walk into any kind of store or restaurant and see 2 or 3 or 4 people standing and talking together, a sight that used to say something to me about community and neighborliness, as soon as I begin to hear any political discourse, I think to myself, I don't want to know those people. And I move away as quickly as possible. I think because in political discourse these days, it seems as though there is very little commitment to conversation as a means of truth finding. I started out with Photoshop because it's a kind of casual dismissal of truth in ways that seem harmless. But I'm not so sure that there is really any harmless dismissal of truth. To quote Paul Anderson, each bit of veiled truth casts a shadow upon the light of Christ, which illumines and liberates the world. With our differently functioning perceptions and senses, the different way that our minds work, we will never all apprehend the truth in the same way, which is why we need others to contribute to our understanding of truth. But truth itself with a capital T arises from God, and to deny that truth is to deny some aspect of God. It is easy for me to say, I won't Photoshop the truth. But my real confession and repentance has to be to begin to speak differently. The goal of my own speaking has to be not persuasion and even less coercion, but discovery of the truth with anyone to whom I am speaking. It is a difficult commitment for me to make, but I believe as a friend of Christ, it's what's required of me. Will you join with me in prayer? Creating, sustaining, and redeeming God, help us to seek your light above our own gratification. Help us to seek your light above the approval of others. Knowing that your light is always one of love. Teach us how to be both truthful and loving, especially how to love those with whom we disagree, whether they are our family members or our enemies. We ask these things through Christ who makes them possible. Amen.
Are there any special sharing or joys? No happiness around? Are there any announcements? No news, good news?
I can think of two birthdays yesterday. Amy Carey
That's right. And
and my partner, Lori Swindler, had the same birthday.
Lori Swindler and Amy Carey had birthdays yesterday, so that is a joy. Maybe, depending on what their age is and whether they want to forget them.
Always a joy to have.
Any other joys, concerns, or announcements? Well, thank you, friends, and have a wonderful Sunday. And I went out of sequence with the last song, but that's okay.